So now I'd like to offer some tips for getting the most out of this class. I've been teaching about 15 years now. A lot of that time I've been teaching to master's students, both MBA and Master of Finance students such as yourself. And so just a few tips on kind of me looking back and seeing what worked for students and what didn't work from students, and hopefully some of this might be helpful to you. First thing, it's good to recognize that finance, at least master's level applied finance like we're studying here, it's both a quantitative and a qualitative subject. So some subjects are very technical. I mean, some of you might have undergraduate degrees in things like math or physics and engineering. Other subjects, of course, are more qualitative, things like history, English, psychology. I would place master's level finances somewhere in between. So we're not going out to solve complicated equations, but a lot of what we do is numerical in nature and involves using equations. And the questions and analytical tools that we're going to use have also underlying frameworks and assumptions that need to be understood. So in other words, like you have this quantitative tool, such as coming up with cost of capital, like we talked about in the introduction, or you have a tool for deciding should a firm make an investment or not. So part of using that tool is quantitative. We're going to use numbers and things and come up with numerical answers. But also some of that tool is qualitative too, because there's a bunch of underlying economics and assumptions that you need to understand and know to really be using the tool in kind of like a mindful and meaningful way. In my opinion, a successful student, and indeed a successful practitioner too, can do both the quantitative and explain the qualitative and the underlying rationale. And so what I mean by that is that, a student who can easily do all the numerical things and come up with the right answer, but they don't really understand what they did, like they can't explain why they did that and what that means, that's not a highly successful student, and that's not someone who's going to go out and be a successful practitioner either. By the same token, someone who can kind of talk a good game, but then they can't sit down and work through the numbers, that's not sufficient either. So you need to be able to do both. You need to be able to work through the numbers, and then you need to be able to explain what's going on. And I would say, this is even true, even if, let's say, you're never going to do financial analysis. Let's just say you're going to go out and your next job is a CEO. People are still going to present analysis to you and numbers to you, and you want to understand what's going on. So if someone's telling you you should buy another firm, and they're claiming that buying this other firm is at a good price, or you're going to do an IPO and an investment bank is telling you this is a good price to IPO at, you want to be able to understand the analysis they did and the assumptions that they made and see if you agree with that or not. So it's important that you do both. You can understand the numbers, and then you can kind of explain the numbers to other people. And so just as another example, as I mentioned before, like a very common example is just a firm is deciding whether to do a project. We have to quantify the opportunity cost. We have to quantify the expected cash flows from the project. And then we have to see, do the present value of those expected cash flows exceed the opportunity cost? And of course, we'll talk more about this later, but we might even come up with a range of quantitative estimates because we know our estimate isn't perfect. Now, a successful student can do both. An successful student can set up that spreadsheet and come up with that number or range of numbers to say, this is, I think, a good project or not a good project, and here's how much value I think we make, or here's how much value I think we destroy. But then they can also present this to non-finance colleagues and have them get the intuition. So in other words, they can present it in a way where you're not just using this kind of finance mumbo jumbo that no one can understand. You can put it in plain language and just explain what it is you did and why it's important and why the firm and its managers need to, pay attention to it. As a way of learning, I find that in order to learn this stuff, for most people, you're going to have some repetition. So sometimes students will say, if we're in person, they'll listen to a lecture, or here we watch a recording. And if the first time they hear something, they don't fully understand it, they get upset. Maybe they're frustrated. They think, wow, maybe I'm just not good at this. I was a history major. I'm not good at numbers. I can't do this. Or maybe they blame me. And wow, the professor confused me. When I had lectures and other subjects, I understood it the first time. But now this didn't completely make sense to me. I would say, keep in mind, finance is a technical subject. I would argue with technical subjects, it's virtually always the case that students have to work through some of the technical problems and things on their own, outside of class, outside of the lecture, before they're going to fully understand the materials. Okay? So just to reiterate, this is not the type of class where I say something once and then you can go do it on an exam. This is the type of class where you watch a lecture. You may on your own have to work through the examples in the lecture if they're examples. And then you're going to have to spend time perhaps looking through the textbook and carefully working through all the practice problems that we're going to give you too. This is not the type of thing, at least for most people, where you hear it once and then you can easily just do it. And so don't get frustrated too. That's the big thing too. Just don't get frustrated. Just recognize ahead of time you're going to have to do this. The lectures, will give you a foundation from which to attempt homework problems. Because again, a big part of learning these things is we give you the foundation, then you go do it on your own, and it's the do it on your own that really solidifies, your understanding of this material. Until you've done it on your own, you don't understand it. A good path, a good kind of plan of attack is to, watch the lectures, make sure you can independently work through the examples in the lectures, maybe read through the book, the assigned readings in the book, which should reinforce the lectures, or even just skim through the book, make sure you understand the examples in the book too. And then, and only after that, then go ahead and attempt to work through the homework problems. After that process, you should expect to have a pretty good understanding of the course. But remember, watching the lectures is just step one. Now, when you're doing these homework problems, which are very important, you make sure you try to actually solve the problems and don't fool yourself into thinking you understand this stuff by reverse engineering the problems. And so what some students do, because we will provide answers to many of the homeworks, is that they approach the homework problems by first looking at the answers and then reverse engineering how the problem was solved. And when these students get a similar problem on the exam, they typically can't solve it. So the right way to try to do the homework problems is attempt to solve all of them. So you have the problem, you go back to your textbook or you go back to the slides, you look at the tool that helps you solve the problem, and you struggle with it until you get the answer. Maybe in the end you don't get the answer, that's okay, but you're struggling. You're not running right away to a classmate who might have a better understanding of it. You're not going and looking for the answer somewhere. Because it's that struggling process that really creates the learning. The trying something and it doesn't seem right and going back to the slides and studying it again and it's that process that really kind of wires this stuff into your brain. So just some final thoughts. Learning finance is really not that difficult if you have the correct mindset and a good system. And so one way to look at it, maybe is just an analogy. Let's say I wanted to train for a 10K race, okay? Which is doable, right? Most people can run a 10K. And let's say I haven't been doing any running up until then. This task shouldn't be too hard a task, provided that, I probably have some system in place. So starting, I don't know how out, maybe 2-3 months out or whatever, I start a weekly running routine, and I get all those runs done, and I try to eat right and get rest and so on. And if I follow that system, it's probably going to be fine. I'm not going to have any trouble with the 10K race. But if I just show up to the race, I might not finish, or the race is really going to beat me up badly. This is really no different. I mean, if you just do the work, if you're watching the lectures, you're attempting the homework problems and things like that, I think you'll all be fine in this class. I'll say our admissions process here at Georgetown's MSF program is very competitive. It keeps getting more competitive. Everyone we admit is, I think, more than qualified to be successful here. I would say there's actually a good number of people who probably could be successful in this program too that we couldn't admit just because of the size constraints on our program. So people that get in here are kind of far above the bar, and if you do the work, we expect that you can all do really well. So I hope you enjoy the recorded lectures that are to come here, and I look forward to seeing all of you in our live sessions.